The second meeting of the 20th Undergraduate Senate is hereby adjourned.
You had people that just didn't like who was going to win again. The president that was going to win again. A lot of people, some people didn't like her, and she didn't like those same people. That was kind of the tip of the toxicity iceberg. There was a lot of that, changing the documents to try to make certain things happen. From that, and amongst a number of other things that kind of happened in the spring, that's when we, as an office, decided to do a number of things like remove the programming boards from under the purview of AUSG, redo the governing documents, the Constitution, and things of that nature, and then move into the bylaws the following year. The elections commissioner, as long as the thresholds of nobody was disenfranchised, no cheating, no anything like that, once they say it has been certified, it's certified. Though it was decertified, it shouldn't have been. That's when I had to come in and say, hey, we're not doing this, right? And so it was this, oh, well, this wasn't done in good taste. Well, what does good taste look like? You know what I mean? So it was a lot of that stuff, but the reason that it wasn't certified is because of the nature in which that Senate was operating.
Half of it was to point out like the hypocrisies of the people in it, and to actually abolish it, and half of it was just like, I don't know, I thought it was kind of funny. It just felt very weird and like a kind of like patronage system where like you'd either be with the president and their team or against, and it just shouldn't be like that. They would like LARP and dress up in suits and like go to their meetings, and I was just like, this is ridiculous. Like it felt like just such an obvious like circus. A lot of colleges now are just fully captured by the interest of their donors, their administration officials. I definitely think that students should have that voice. It's just that AUSG wasn't that voice. I feel like after raising awareness of how useless the people who were in AUSG were, I feel like a lot better people got involved.
So on AUSG e-board, we have the president, the vice president, the comptroller, the secretary. And so then we have the Senate, which is made of around 30 senators. I am the president of the student government, the American University Student Government. It entails being chief advocacy officer. Whatever they pass in the Senate as chief advocacy officer, I am then supposed to present it along with Vice President Camino.
I am the person who presides over the undergraduate senate, and when I'm not around, there's a speaker pro temp who does it. I also do all of the advocacy related programming for AUSG, so we did a safety festival last week, we did coming out day, things like that. So the speaker pro tempore is not elected during the elections, it's picked by the senators, so during our first meeting, the 30 of us all vote on one person to basically be the leader or our speaker. In my role, I just help senators draft resolutions, amendments, and really make sure that their advocacy goals are being accomplished. We sort of have checks within each position on every single other position.
The Judicial Board is a very vital part of student government because it holds the others in check and accountable for things that they're doing out of the scope of their role, or if they're stepping out of line to the point where they're doing what they're not supposed to do. We don't advocate. We're strictly only interpretation and on the documents, that's it. I work closely with our advisor whenever I need to do a controversial ruling, or if a violation occurs or something that could, cause a lot of commotion.
Probably work more closely with the e-board as I meet with them weekly. We also have a graduate student that works a little more intimately with the Senate side.
So I am the graduate assistant for student government through the Center for Student Involvement. Most of what my role entails would be meeting with the committee chairs every other week. I go to meetings every weekend. I get to hang out with my lovely students and hear about what their problems are with the campus. and help them to become better advocates.
In the Senate, as my role as a senator, we work on like resolutions, amendments, trying to advocate for students. We don't really have the power to like directly implement changes. We more like make suggestions, or as strong suggestions as we could possibly make to administration. And then we like interface with different administrators to try to get them to implement the changes that we think is in the best interest of students.
Primarily, resolutions would be introduced whenever we were emailed by the parliamentarian and assigned a resolution. So once that would happen, we would have a meeting.
It's usually, I would say, the committee chairs and the sponsors of the resolutions that end up meeting with admin one-on-one.
Comptroller represents the entire student body's financial interests at the university, which kind of, in a way, is everything, because everything at this university comes down to money. The CSI, the Center for Student Involvement, allocates around, on average, $100,000 to student government every year. This year we have a budget of $90,000.
Okay, so generally I've heard that the American University Student Government is one of the most influential, one of the most respected student governments within the U.S. as a whole, but that reputation has fallen over recent years due to accusations of corruption within the student government and people and senators acting in their own self-interest. Since that reputation has fallen, current student senators are trying to bring that reputation back.
We really want to change the student perception of Senate because we've heard negative things. I heard the word useless thrown around. I also heard the word cliquey. Uselessness term, we so want to get rid of that. Our students are elected by their constituencies on the basis that they're going to make change. And we want to see them do that.
If you ask the average student, they probably don't know what student government does or what they're supposed to do, or probably don't think they do much of anything.
First, I didn't know what it stood for, but I mean, I think it's pretty chill. I haven't really interacted with anyone on it yet, but I personally haven't seen any involvement with like AUSG around campus.
I don't really see them doing a lot. I see like a lot of talk, not really a lot of action. And that's like a little frustrating.
They have power in that they can address problems and make policy and make issues known to each other, but I have not seen their effects really broad on campus.
Obviously the efficacy of AUSG to make policy changes is disputed. There's a certain amount of pressure that they can put on trustees and administration as AUSG that random students don't have.
I think that it could be effective. I think it's a good way to filter public opinion on something from the general campus, but I don't know how much power they have in actually affecting the change that people voted for.
I've seen them pass a lot of resolutions that I agree with and that I think are very important to pass. I think where the efficacy then starts to feel lower is when AU's supposed to uphold their portion of it. Whenever AU's well, you guys might have voted yes on that resolution, but we're not going to listen. It's frustrating because then it also gives them a bad look. It makes it look like they don't do much when they're obviously advocating for change or passing resolutions that students want, but AU's not upholding their end of it all.
Why would I go to someone on the AUSG when I could go to the actual establishments on campus that have probably better resources than a couple of college students? I think AUSG talks about the connection that they have to the administration, and they bring that up a lot when they're talking about things that they want to accomplish. They're yeah, we are a direct line to the administration, and they try to put that within their advertising to students, but I don't really see that.
They are to be looked upon as representatives and voices for the student body because they have access to administration that regular students do not. They meet with admin, they're in meetings, and they're working behind the scenes for that. That's as it is defined in their job description. That's the perks that they get when they're sworn in.
I would say AUSG is open to working with administration. I'm not entirely sure about administration working with us.
We are, in a sense, the students' employees. The members of our organization that do get stipends, they are paid off of student fees. So we are basically the student employees, we're their representatives, we are accountable to them. But we also work most directly with the administration. And sometimes there is a feeling from some members of administration that we should be their arm of PR to students, and we're not.
We want to work with our students on having a more rational decision-making process. imposing solutions instead of just saying, we don't like this, we don't like you, you need to change it. We want to say, well, this is our proposed solution and we're willing to work with you, instead of using phrases like condemnation or dislike or distrust. We want to work together to build a relationship and improve things.
In student government, I get emotional reactions to some of the things that administration does, and a lot of times it falls on members of e-board who are in those meetings to really police, control, and be strategic about how we present our emotions in order to keep lines of communication open, keep the advocacy work going, because it's really, a lot of times it's on us to keep the follow-up happening and make sure that things are actually moving.
I think when there are disagreements, we have to find a way to agree. That can cause a little bit of a rift, but like in any relationship, it's about overcoming those rifts and overcoming those challenges.
I want to say that administration does acknowledge all the issues, and then they kind of tell us sometimes like this is impossible to achieve financial reason-wise. But when we're saying like, oh, there's this problem and y'all didn't do this job right, there are people too at the end of the day, and they still like get upset when we bring stuff. They're like, am I not doing a good enough job? And I'm like, yeah, you're not doing a good enough job, and that's why we're bringing this to you.
I feel like the American University student body has a lot of conflict and is in conflict constantly with the school administration. That's like probably the number one issue that I hear from students is like, we don't like the administration.
My interactions with Sylvia Burwell were less than what I would have wanted. Every time I saw her, I would always have the Survivor Bill of Rights, a copy of it printed out to give to her, as well as a bunch of student stories, and I would give them to her. And every single time I did, she would either pass it off to the person next to her or fold it up and put it in her pocket. And I never ever received a response, ever. And I would follow up on email, and that activity, I would say they've gotten a little smarter about being maybe like emotionally understanding that they can't just, with their actions, literally show them passing things away or not showing interest in a subject students bring up. I would definitely say that in my interactions with this cabinet, of the president's cabinet, which many of them are, they're the same members, but the tone has shifted. They are more like they are trying to show that they are listening.
Frankly speaking, the student government is really at the mercy of the administration. We've seen that the real successes of the student government have been in mass mobilization of protesters. I mean, those are the movements that really show it's only by really turning out and getting different existing student institutions to support you that we see the needle move in what the administration does.
Back in January, on January 25th, an email went out from Sylvia Burwell basically explaining the ways that students were allowed to protest on campus and things like that.
Once we first heard about the policy, we were like, okay, this has got to go. This cannot happen. It was a complete restriction on students' rights and student freedom and student speech, and it was just very suppressive.
It became about, okay, why did administration impose that directive? What can we do to reverse it? And working forward, how can we enshrine student rights much more deeply into our campus policies?
During April, we organized protests that brought awareness to this issue, and I think it changed the way that administration saw how we as a student government felt.
Through March, we really saw how student governments were using BDS resolutions to call on their universities to divest from that occupation, from that genocide. And so, we set out working with campus partners and organizations to bring that into AUSG, to call on administration and the Board of Trustees to divest our endowment from corporations that are complicit in the occupation. We saw within 45 minutes them send an email to the entire campus community, flat out rejecting and condemning the Senate, rejecting the BDS resolution. Probably one of our best researched resolutions. And so, for them to reject that policy flat out is truly appalling.
Instead of researching what students need on campus, we are very caught up with, oh, is student government good? Is student government bad? What are we doing that's not okay and that we need to improve through an amendment?
They put me on trial because they said I'd missed too many meetings, even though I was chairing a committee and had less unexcused absences than some of the people who tried to impeach me. Some of the people who tried to impeach me came up after and they were like, hey, you're right. We probably shouldn't have done that. I would say after that trial is when we actually started doing stuff, because up until then it had been like a lot of no one really knows what they're doing. A few people know what they're doing, but like it's just a lot of wasting time. And then that trial happened. I don't want to like pat myself on the back, but I kind of put them on blast because I was like, hey, why are we doing this? That was just really goofy. That's something I told the Senate as I was leaving as well. Like, hey, even now I hear on campus people talking about how AUSG is like cliquey, or, you know, there's people keeping to themselves and not really being inclusive. Let's change that because we are literally student government. We should be representing everyone.
I created a commission as speaker to rewrite and improve our democratic documents. The short version, we call it, is RID. And RID specifically has been working on rewriting our governing documents, doing all that work on the side, and including our undergraduate councils who often don't get an opportunity to work with Senate, including them, the executive board and Senate, and the judicial board, giving a space for really important campus organizations who have been doing a lot of great advocacy work, a space to come to AUSG and have some more input. One thing that we're trying to do a lot more now is work with the undergraduate councils, specifically because the UGCs are a lot more hands-on with students, and they do a lot of events where students attend because they want to be affiliated with their specific school. We do have a specific fund that I believe has around $20,000 in our budget, specifically for doing events with student organizations, and student orgs aren't even aware of that. So what ends up happening is a lot of times AUSG advertises like, hey guys, like, come do events with us, and then it happens. I feel like student orgs should just get a seat at the table immediately.
I know there's much more of an effort now, and I'm also trying to make the effort to like connect with like clubs and other organizations to see really like what they want, and if we can like, you know, get like a wider amount of opinions so that we can really know what students care about.
Primarily, I would want there to be more effective representation of the student organizations within the student government, because I feel like that's where really, like, that's where student power lies, and student community and student involvement, which is within the clubs and organizations, and student government is a very small proportion. I don't see a point if you're involved only within the student senate but not the campus as a whole, because at that point you're not representing anyone.
I would find myself going to more community involved members. There's some organizations on campus that I think have a better understanding of like where students are at rather than AUSG.
I feel like if you were to take a percentage of like how many of those students represent the campus as a whole, you would find that the majority of them are probably like SPA students or like in the government department, which I understand that that's probably like what they're most passionate about and what they care about the most, but I think for it to properly represent AU as a campus, like we need like more diverse backgrounds in that sense.
I don't know every single person and every single like facet of AUSG, but I think it's majority white. I think that there could be like further representation on the council and like in student government to reflect like all different types of people that are on campus and not just white men.
From my Senate, we were all from like pretty diverse backgrounds. I mean, from financial backgrounds, from racial backgrounds, from all sorts of backgrounds, and we came in with a lot of different perspectives.
The women that we do have in the Senate, a lot of them, like myself, like Julia, we take on stronger leadership positions. Haghnegahdar, she's Speaker Pro Tem. We have a lot of our chairs are also women, the chairs of our committees. So even though there may be more men, we have a lot of strong women too.
If you look at the breaking down of the percentages, you can look that some schools have 3 times or more the amount of students voting. You know, in the School of Business, Kogod, there is something like 11% of the students voting. And from SPA, I think there's like 37, 38%. So when you think about this, SPA has much more voice, students from SPA, than the people in COGOD.
Regardless of whether they support us or not, we represent them in some capacity. It might not be an effective capacity all the way through, but students ought to make their voices heard.
These votes matter because it helps us show that like this many students want this thing. Because we're taking it to the Board of Trustees meeting, we're taking that referendum, we're giving them the results, we're saying this many students voted for this, we're giving them the whole breakdown, we're really presenting this information to administration because that allows us to say like, look, as you make this decision on whether or not to arm AUPD, perchance, like that decision, you need to look at what students are telling you.
If there's very, very high voter turnouts and it's explicit to the student or the American University Administration that there's a lot of students that want a certain policy and that's what they're voting in it, then they're kind of obliged to pass that policy. But because of the fall in the reputation of the American student government and really like the lack of respect for American student government, the lack of belief that they can really change anything, there's very, very low like voter turnout.
One of the concerns we hear is you have 11, 13, 18% voter turnout. You guys aren't legitimate AUSG. You're not, your referendums don't mean anything. Why should the administration, the Board of Trustees listen to you guys when you have such low voter turnout? So we went on a campaign to get the highest possible voter turnout, and we did.
So no fall in the past that we have data for has had higher turnout. And so I think that that's an encouraging sign that at least people trust that like it means something to vote.
I think the biggest part of that was those referendums, because those are definitely issues that people found like to be super, super important, and I think that's why a lot of people voted. When we pass a referendum, no matter what it is, high levels of administration have to have a serious discussion about it that usually actually involves members of student government. We pass a lot of stuff, and we have a lot of stuff that we're working on right now, but I think part of the problem is it's hard for us to like publicize that enough so that everybody knows what's going on.
Overall, I would just like ask for them to be louder in the sense that like really let us know when you guys are meeting, reach out to clubs on campus and ask them to repost like, oh, we're having this meeting, we want input from students, can you please repost it so that your members can see it?
I think AUSG needs to make itself more transparent to the everyday, American University goer, for lack of average Eagle, if you will. Maybe if there was some kind of way for, them to be more accessible to the student body, I think that would be the best way of getting themselves more known.
And oftentimes, if something is resolved, you might not realize, but it might have been student government because we talked to the administrator that's in charge of it and they just reversed the action or they did something else. What we really want is what all students want at the end of the day. Like when we came back to campus this year and we realized that the bridge and the DAV weren't taking dining dollars anymore, everybody was like, whoa, what's going on? And we all sort of just like muttered a complaint. But what ended up happening is the student government comptroller, Sal Catone, went to like work immediately. So he's been speaking with admin basically every single week. They're checking in on like, how could we improve this? How can we get dining dollars back? What is the technical issue and how could we resolve it? So I guess I wish that students were more aware of all the things that we do end up doing. But since we work sometimes on a pretty small scale, it can go under most people's radar.
I don't think previous Senates were as focused as the Senate and as the student government we have now. I think we have taken student government to a stronger level than it was in previous years.
When I first joined, it was in disarray. I will admit that. But I would say now, being that I am the longest serving individual in student government now, that it has improved immensely. They're focused more on advocacy and not amending the governing documents and trying to change things for their own benefit. It doesn't seem like people are as power hungry as they were when I first joined.
I feel like a lot of people told me when I was first joining and then when I was even in it that it's a very toxic group of people, I'm gonna be honest. I learned that there actually is so much community. A lot of people say like student government is toxic, and so people assume that because previous members of student government were really toxic, there's still students here. Like we're here for 4 years, so they still see the old student government, and I think that is still going to have that ripple effect until the people who saw really dysfunctional student government graduate. I think students are increasingly becoming more comfortable coming to us knowing that we are actually representing them and not some LARPy role-playing organization.
There's been everything from, oh, you guys are LARPers, you guys are pretending to be in House of Cards, and that was, I think, a really big perception last year and the year before.
We're not all just like power-hungry wonks.
The organization is defined by the people in it. And if you get a couple bad apples in a bunch, then it's going to be looked upon as bad. And because of past Senates and past e-boards, the reputation of AUSG has been crushed.
I think it's right for students to be skeptical of like governance organizations. Like if someone's claiming to represent you, you better make sure that they're actually representing you. So I actually really agree with like the skeptics of AUSG. I think it keeps us accountable.
I don't believe that AUSG should be, its role should be just advocating. I think our role should be empowering every student to be their own best advocate. And that's showing them, as you know, that's being that example for what advocacy looks like, how you can approach it.
I would absolutely encourage them to look on the AUSG website and find out who the representative is and speak to them. That's another thing we're working on, as well as having our students reach out, having constituency events, hosting more town halls, having more socials, and saying, we want you to know us, you elected us, you chose us, and we want you to have your voices heard.
I want all students at AU, if they want to be in student government, or if they don't, I want them to have a student government that they can count on.
And it's steadily struggling to recover, but I feel it is recovering. Now is the time to look at a rebirth of AUSG, because I believe it definitely is occurring now.